Okay, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And that's who we are. We're a think tank in DC. We're actually unfortunately, we're on K Street. But what can you do? So that's our book. Mike Lind and I have had the pleasure for the last year, essentially, of slogging through this. And MIT is going to be publishing it some century in the future. Ideally in January, February. We're working on the cover art, so if you have a better idea, that's kind of the working cover art right now, kind of a big corporate thing, just crushing the little guy, which is sort of how people think about this. So what I want to really say today in my 10 minutes, which is now going negative, is that a lot of the feelings and thoughts we have about big versus small, particularly in the business sector, are really driven by emotion. And they're driven by political orientation and identity. They're not really driven by the facts. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So sort of three big things. Anthropocene is a production system. Even though this is a little vacation spot here, it's organized as a production system. The globe is a production system. That is all it is. Everything we do on the globe is to organize production for human beings. Organizations are at the core of that, unless you want to go back to everybody living in individual little groups. Organizations fundamentally are how we organize production. We've been doing that for 5,000 years. And thirdly, technology is what determines organizational size. So those are my three main premises there. Until really recently, we used to think that big corporations and big business were generally beautiful. That was seen as a progressive force in America. It was highly unionized. It paid high wages. It helped America win World War II. It brought new technologies to the masses. And this was seen as progressive. That is building the Hoover Dam. So the state of Arizona didn't build the Hoover Dam. Little small businesses didn't build the Hoover Dam. That was done out of Washington in a big, massive effort. So now what's happened really since the 1970s, there's been this emergent small is beautiful movement, really from the right and the left. So for the left, if you ever read E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, what he's really articulating there is a world in which everybody is consigned to essentially using craft technology in little small groups. And what he doesn't say is that you're also then consigned to having little incomes, because that technology system is not very productive. And at the same time, you have this emergent right in the 70s, that started to be distrustful, not just of big companies, but of small companies. And so it's interesting that today you have a world in our politics where you have people like Bernie Sanders talking about small-scale enterprises and natural organic cheese companies in Vermont. And you have people like Paul Ryan, who wrote an article for Forbes magazine before he became speaker, and the title of the article was Down with Big Business. So this was something a Republican never would have said 30 years ago, never in a million years. But now you have this right-left emergent consensus, if you will, that big organizations, whether they be government or business, are somewhat suspect. So that's how people think about the world. Wouldn't we all want to live in that nice little town and look at all those old small businesses, and they're our neighbors, they're our friends, look at how clean it is, they're helping us. And that's like a big corporation that's just raping and pillaging the environment and only out for profit. I don't want to live in that world. Well, let's look at actually what the reality is. So in our book, we looked at virtually every single scholarly academic study that compares firm size and various social outcomes. So there's one that everybody has bought into the mythology that small business creates more jobs. Actually, they don't. They create about the same number of jobs as their share of the economy. What they do is they create a lot of jobs and then they destroy them quite quickly. So you have to get 40, according to Scott Stern at MIT, you have to have 40 startups to end up with one employee after 10 years. So they create a lot of jobs, but then they go out of business and lay people off. Earnings inequality, interesting. Everybody assumes big corporations, that's the source of earnings inequality, the big CEOs getting all the money. Actually, when you look at the BLS data on, this is actually for establishment size, they don't have firm size, but just establishment size earnings inequality, the bottom 10% of workers in small establishments compared to the top 10% in big establishments, the exact same ratio from the largest establishment size to the smallest establishment size. So on earnings inequality, no difference. All right, what about the rest? Wages. In the US, large firms pay 56% more than small firms. So if you're concerned about standard of living for the average American worker, large firms are better. Benefits, vastly better benefits, much more health care, much more parental leave, much more retirement benefits. Productivity. This is one of those things, if there's a universal law in economics from every single country in the world, it's that large firms are more productive than small firms. R&D and innovation. Again, one of these mythologies that come up, that small firms are innovative, big firms are these big dinosaurs that can't innovate their way out of a paper bag. In fact, that's simply not true. Large firms, as you'll see, do a lot more R&D, and when you measure innovation properly, which the new NSF data sets allow you to do, you find that big firms are actually more innovative than small firms, even in technology industries. Exports, not even close. Big firms export, small firms generally don't. Social responsibility, spending money, real money, on BSR. Big firms spend much more than small firms as a share of revenue. Environmental protection, I'll get to that in a minute. Big firms outperform small. Tax compliance. Everybody's like, oh, well, what about GE and all these companies that skimp on their taxes? Turns out that tax fraud is, large corporations underreport by about 20%. Small companies underreport by about 50 to 60%. In fact, if you live in a region or a neighborhood where other small businesses are underreporting, you're highly likely to underreport as well. If you're in Minnesota, where people are honest, actually, tax reporting for small business is actually pretty good. If people are honest in Minnesota, you don't know any tax cheats. If you're in New Jersey, everybody's underreporting their taxes. Worker tenure, again, significant benefits, significant differences. You work at a large firm, your tenure is probably 4 times more than if you're working at a small firm. Worker safety, again, across the board, across industries. Very good study just looking at coal mines, for example, where there have been a lot of coal mine collapses and deaths. Large coal mines, significantly more safe than small coal mines. Worker training. Again, big companies spend a lot more training their workers. Unionization rates, big companies are more unionized. And employment diversity. Big companies employ more women as a share of their workforce, and they employ more minorities as a share of their workforce. So clearly, when you would look at this, you would say, Bernie Sanders has got to be in that column, right? Every single thing that progressives should care about is on the right in that column, and yet they're not. So let me just go into a couple of quick little deeper dives. Big business is better for the environment. Big firms they face more stringent regulations. So if you look at the way environmental regulations are written in both the law and the regulatory promulgation, big firms face more stringent regulations than in many cases, because small firms are exempt from regulations or they don't have to face the exact same stringency of regulation. Big firms are inspected more often. Big firms spend more money. You look at innovation. We're not going to solve climate change without much, much better and deeper clean energy innovation. Large firms are spending the lion's share of R&D, and they're more innovative. Okay, so this is really, instead of that little bucolic thing on Main Street, this is what a small business economy looks like. As I said before, in the US, small firms pay 46% less. In the Philippines, small firms pay 65% less than the workers at big firms in the Philippines. In Indonesia, 68% less. In India, 78% less. And in Latin America, micro enterprises pay 94% less. So you want to raise worker standards, living standards. It's not by micro enterprises. That's how do you lower people's living standards. It's not by creating more small businesses. It's by getting more large companies that have scale, that have efficiencies, and they pass at least some of those on to their workers. So that's really what a big business economy looks like, although that's the old Apple headquarters. I should have gotten the new one. All right, so finally, just to close, technology has been one of these things that people on both sides of the ideological spectrum keep imagining are going to evolve in ways that make their utopias possible. So if you look at the right, for example, Cato Institute has written this, and a number of people, they look at this new technology suite coming out as this is going to finally allow this Hayekian world where we can get rid of the state. So Bitcoin means you don't need any more fiat money. You can get rid of treasury because you got Bitcoin. They say, for example, things like VMT, vehicle miles traveled in cars, means you can get rid of government provision of roads. You can rely completely on private infrastructure. And then they're talking about the sharing economy. This is this beautiful world where there are no more quotient transaction costs, no need for big corporations, except for Uber in this case. The left, I mean, who wouldn't want to live there? I would love to live in Hobbiton. The only problem is if I lived in Hobbiton, I would have no money. But the left has this view that somehow these technologies, we're all going to be living in there. I'm going to be doing 3D printing. I'm going to have a solar panel on the roof. And there will be some drones that deliver some food for me once in a while. So that's a nice vision. I mean, who wouldn't want the state to be sort of less intrusive in your daily life? And who wouldn't want to live in Hobbiton? Those are nice things. The reality is this is what the world is going to be. It's going to be more big companies. US average firm size is going up about 0.5% a year. Every year, the average firms get bigger. More Amazons, including at Whole Foods, more Toyotas, more Duke Energy, more big government. I think that's inexorable, and I think fundamentally it is a good progressive thing. Thank you.